Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making Action Happen. I'm Sarah Blackhurst.
And I'm Brian McCain.
We are excited today. You know, if you've been listening for the last little bit, we've had all these candidates on. Of course, it's an election year, and we're excited to have yet another Action 22 member who is running for office, running for the very important seat of CD3 in Colorado. Adam Frisch is joining us today.
Good afternoon, Sarah and Brian. Honored to be here.
Well, thank you for coming.
Of course.
Adam and I have not known each other for very long. We've talked on the phone several times, but I moderated a forum for that he was in back a couple months ago now, hasn't it been?
Exactly.
So that's the only way we've gotten to know each other.
No, it's great to get to
in the last little bit. But you've been traveling around and doing all kinds of stuff. This is a tough district. And for our listeners who don't know, will you lay out the geographic size?
We have Colorado District 3 is 54,000 miles square, larger than the state of Mississippi, larger than England or Ireland. It's huge. It's one of the largest districts, without a doubt, in the country. I know Alaska's single district. You know, there's only a few states that actually have fewer Congress people than senators, right? And Wyoming's one of them, and Alaska's one of them. So, Colorado's getting an eighth. But CD3 is, proudly independent, and that's super really important. I kind of start the district having that conversation that starts in Pueblo in my mind, kind of works its way down south to the border, picks up about 4/5 of the New Mexico border.
Yeah.
We've picked up a little bit of east as well now after losing route up in Steamboat, and goes all the way along the Four Corners, 100% of that Utah border, and picks up about a third or a fourth of the Wyoming border.
So for perspective, the only congressional district in the country that is bigger than CD3 geographically is in Alaska.
Is it really?
I think so. And as somebody that spent 10 years driving all over that district, I would always joke that during winter months, I could drive to the Gulf of Mexico faster than I could drive to Grand Junction from Pueblo.
I hear you. No, it's spread out, and there's some commonalities about some things. There's obviously some geographical differences about it. I know Pueblo bristles a little bit about being put in this rural bucket, which the majority of the district is, and, proudly blue collar, proudly working class. I was down here 7 or 8 or 9 times during the primary. I won, I think, because I put 8,000 some miles on the road. And as I mentioned before, we put together we took our old family camper trailer. It was a 19-foot thing. We turned it into the Beat Bobart buggy. And we drove around a huge part of the district. And those last 6 days of the campaign in the primary, my son and a couple of his friends, we went to 54 towns in 6 days and 1,900 miles. Nucla, Dove Creek. We were in places that candidates haven't been into in probably a generation. But while it's very big, when I argue, and it is the prettiest district of the 435 by far. The plains, the mountains, the rivers, the valleys, it's gorgeous.
We agree with you on that one for sure.
Except for I do not like the I-70 corridor. That's the one that I always avoid driving. Highway 50. I think my favorite way to get to the western slope from Pueblo is Highway 50.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Going west. That's my favorite. I-70. I think on average it's shut down more than it's open during the year.
Yeah.
And you just seem to get stuck, and then, it's just like a straight line. But Highway 50, man, that's like the best drive in the country, I think.
Oh, I like the highway. I agree with you, but I like 9.
Yeah, when I have to come through Buena Vista to come down into Pueblo, that's one of the most beautiful roads as well.
Oh, I love
and
that
then Cortez up the Ridgeway is also some of the most beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
To be done in a car or a Jeep or a motorcycle or a bicycle.
Agreed. And we know that well. But Brian and I have both done those trips where it's so many days, and like 1,800 miles in 18 hours, and we've done that with stops all along the way. So here's one of the things we often hear from people who are outlanders, is that one issue, like you've seen one rural issue, you've seen them all. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think regardless of the Nucleus or the Dove Creeks to the Aspens or the Telluride, people want to live in a small town and know their community members. And I think that's something that's universal within this district. Even in Grand Junction and Pueblo are two large communities. I still view, when I'm talking to people, they view like they live in a small town, if you will, a little bit, that everyone knows each other well. And, I think there's some common issues that affect the West. Obviously, water is affecting every single square mile, every single community of this district. And I think that's something really, really important to try to figure that out as well. Obviously, the San Luis Valley is having a little bit of different water issues than those in Grand Junction or up in Moffett, but it's a lot of the same conversations, which is just that we need more water and we need to protect the water that we do have. And so I think there's some commonalities about it, but, some places are more ag and some people are more ranching and we have a couple, resort communities as well, but everyone relies on water. And that's something that's super important for everybody.
So why did you decide to run? What motivated you?
The tipping point was when, Representative Bobart and her co-leader, Marjorie Taylor Greene of the entertainment industry, stood up and started yelling and screaming at a president of the United States, not just President Biden, but anyone who stands up and screams and yells at any president, let alone when he was talking about his son. That was kind of the tipping point. I had spent October, November looking at this race, and Bobart said something horrible, bigoted, unfocused about the district. And I pulled out some numbers, and I use a lot of numbers, from 2020, and I saw that while Marjorie Taylor Greene received 75% of the vote in 2020, and Paul Gosar and Andy Biggs and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz all had between 65 and 75% of the vote in 2020, I saw that Lauren Boebert only got 51% of the vote. And of all these extremists, and I have some issues with some of the extremists on policies on the left side as well, she was the only one that is actually electorally weak. And I looked at those numbers and saw that if 5% of the people would have voted differently in 2020, Bobart would have lost. I think, so my view was someone needed to get about 10% of her prior voters to switch now because of the redistricting. And my assumption was if a moderate, pro-energy, pro-business Democrat could get by the primary, which would not be easy, especially, being a middle-aged, white, straight, successful male, let alone from a resort community, let alone from Aspen, Colorado. I'm not from there, but I've lived there for the past 20 years. If I could get by that, I could build what I'm focused on now, which is this bipartisan pro-normal party coalition. And I think a lot of people in the district especially kind of want the circus to stop, and they want someone to focus on their issues. And I truly believe a lot of those issues that we all face are nonpartisan. And I'm a little naive. I'm not completely naive. But when I think it comes to a lot of ag issues, and when I think it comes to a lot of ranching issues and land protection and water protection, and this focus on independence and accountability, I truly believe that it's more about who's going to focus on the job, one, take it seriously, and realizing this is not just a place to audition for a future television show hosts. It is truly about, who do you want in those subcommittee meetings, in those committee meetings, negotiating and fighting for you and your family, your kids and your grandkids and your community and your business. Yeah. And I think that is what, and I and a lot of other people, even those that had voted for her before, I think a lot of people feel very disappointed that Lauren Boebert is not taking the job seriously and not focused on the job.
So we are constantly hearing about, there's 4 issues that our members are constantly talking about. One of them is water. I'm going to ask you a really tough water question in just a second.
I'm pro-water, just for the record. Okay. I'm pro-water.
So
I'm anti-water.
We're anti-water, yeah.
Pro-beer, anti-water.
Right. So water's one of them. Public safety, we're hearing about this constantly. Yeah. Our economy, inflation, Colorado's like what, number 1?
Colorado is impacted by inflation. We're like one of the 2 highest states.
So we're one of the 2 highest states. So inflation, of course, education, and then water, education, energy, public safety, and energy. Yeah, those are the 4 big ones that we talk about all the time. Okay, so let's talk about inflation.
Yep.
Let's talk about, how do we get through this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've said this before. The White House and the Federal Reserve, they blew it at the end of the day. There was this conversation of transitory. It was used a lot, which in English terms was this is going to last a couple months and then come down, and it certainly didn't. I spent 10 years in New York City traveling the world and was super involved in global interest rates for a while. So I have a pretty good grasp of kind of what makes the economy tick and where the supply chains run into problems and that. And obviously there was this huge lockdown during COVID, and the service part of the economy pretty much shut down. And so people started just buying a lot of stuff. At the same time, China shut down and the supply chain shut down, and all those containers that you see all over the world, they went up by 5 or 10x. They became 5 or 10 times more expensive to ship from Asia over here. And it just goes to show how important it is to try to produce as much as we can domestically. I'm a big believer in fair trade, and we need to have other people besides the United States companies producing things or having things produced here. My wife runs a manufacturing business that her father started that she runs. So we understand what it's like to actually manufacture on shore. It's not easy, but it's really, really important. And so I think as soon as COVID restrictions opened up, thank goodness, longer than it should have taken, but it did, there's obviously huge demand to buy at the same time that the federal government put a tremendous amount of money in there. And I think some of those first stimulus packages were good. I talked about in my campaign, even in the Democratic primary, I am a big believer in joining the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's my number one goal that I want to do when I get to Congress. And that Problem Solvers Caucus is made up of 29 Dems and 29 Republicans.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, and there's not one in the Senate, but this is kind of this is where Joe Manchin and some of these other people have come from. They're more moderate, and they just want to get stuff done. While, to me, the caucus should be filled up with 435 people, because if you're not there solving problems, what are you really doing? And I when I get in there, I'll have to find a Republican, and I will find one, and I'll go there and try to figure out how to do stuff. And that Problem Solvers Caucus brought us the first bipartisan infrastructure bill from a couple of years ago, and it brought us the first COVID relief package. Mm-hmm. And that was probably, in hindsight, that was more than enough to probably balance the economic loss we saw during the COVID shutdown with the stimulus that came from the government. Those future stimulus packages, all that was excess money, and you have too much money chasing too few goods, and that's the definition of what inflation is. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be hard to do. I mean, it's mostly a fiscal conversation with what happens in the White House and Congress, and then you have this monetary conversation, which is a fancy word of saying where interest rates are. And the Federal Reserve is obviously hiking interest rates, and they're not going to stop. They're going to keep on going up, and that's why we're seeing student loan go up. That's why we're seeing mortgage prices go up, and it's going to be a challenge. And hopefully, we can just get more of the supply chain opened up, and the supply back in there that hopefully should have some help on inflation, but it's killing everybody. As you said, especially in Colorado, housing prices, credit card debt, student loan, universities, or even small community colleges as well. It's not just these kind of the 4-year colleges where education is really hitting people. And I think it's hitting everyone really, really hard. And so I think, again, focusing on it, being willing to talk about it, and trying to figure out a way to get those supply chains opened up, and making sure that any investments that comes out of D.C. is very, very thoughtful and doesn't increase inflation. Now, it is coming down. I think gas was as high as $5. Mm-hmm. I think as I just drove in here, I saw it at $3.62. Mm-hmm. So, that's about a 23% drop of the high point of gas prices. They need to come down more. And as we all know, we drive a lot more miles than the vast majority of people in the country, mm-hmm. and including the state as well.
And it's good that those are coming down now because school just started.
Yeah.
And I have to go to 4 or 3 different schools to take kids. So it's tough. So when it comes to public safety, most of our candidates on here are either local or state. So that's handled different than the federal side of it. But one thing that I've worked on in the past that can impact this is federal resources for, say, the HIDA program, which is the high intensity drug trafficking areas, which is some federal funds that come down and assist local law enforcement. I think that is a program that absolutely works. And today in the Chieftain, or yesterday, they had an article about how they busted a gang drug distribution and murder ring here in Pueblo, and it really impacted the crime on the streets. What are some thoughts and ideas from a federal standpoint, how you can bring that down? Because fentanyl is, I think, the worst in Colorado out of any other state, and also cocaine use in Colorado. Yeah. And all of this is trafficked from, it's not made here. It comes in here.
No, and I think one of the unintended consequences of the legalization of marijuana, which I was supportive of and I'm supportive of, but I think there's something that a lot of people missed in Colorado was, in the theory was if you legalized it and taxed it and regulated, the product would be safer. Mm-hmm. There'd be a lot less violence coming over the border, especially what happened mostly from Mexico. And it'd be a lot safer, and there'd be some tax revenue that could go into other community goods. What I think a lot of people underestimated was the illegal marijuana had an infrastructure in place of supply from the cartels. Mm-hmm. Right? And the cartels haven't left. They've just shifted what they're dealing. And so they've given up on marijuana, which most people would view as pretty benign if it's used properly, medical as well as recreation. And all of a sudden you're seeing some really hard stuff come in here. Mm-hmm. And, this opioid crisis of a couple of years ago that was really kind of the Appalachian, everything else like that. It's also affecting rural parts of the West as well. Yeah. And I think that loss of marijuana in the cartel business, which is a positive, unfortunately it's been filled up with something else that is a lot worse and destructive. Mm-hmm. And so while a lot of it is petty crime and things like that that's happening, I know Pueblo and Grand Junction, some of these bigger cities are running into some other problems, but talking to people in some of our 2,000 person towns, that are an hour away from a lot of places are starting to see the effects of this, and it's not good. And I think we got to figure out that unintended consequences of what else can we do to kind of buck that up, because it's not only is it the crime, but the underlying crime is that a lot of this is affecting teenagers and kids, and it's getting younger and younger. And as someone who has a 15-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, it certainly hits home about what's happening there. Yeah,
and like I said, policy-wise, this is more of a state and local issue, but federally, this is it's money. It's a support issue, like adding those resources to the local communities, where you have rural towns and counties in Colorado that have maybe not even a sheriff's officer on duty between 1 and 6 in the morning, and that's when this happens. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. Also with that, you mentioned something about the cartel where they thought that this would impact the cartel business. Again, another project I worked on for years. You're right. The cartel just shifted. In fact, their largest moneymaker now is human trafficking. Yeah. It's not even drugs. I think drugs is like number 3. There was a point where avocado theft and distribution was like higher than drugs in this and oil. But that's an important fact that people don't realize. It didn't make the problem go away. The cartel are great business people. They know how to make money. They care about money, and they'll make money however they can. And with those federal resources, we can kind of chip back on that a bit in our state.
Yeah, no, I think there's a way to be fiscally responsible and fiscally conservative, which I am. But at the same time, it's important for dollars to come back to our district. And we should not be embarrassed or shy about doing that. And I think that's really, really important. The representative is there to represent the 700 and some thousand people that every district has, about 700,000 people plus or minus some. And their job is to go there and fight for the values and fight for resources to come back, whether it's infrastructure or health. I've talked about this rural health access and try to get those federal dollars in at the county health department level. Usually the vast majority of our county health departments are professionally, sophisticatedly staffed, but they know the boots on the ground situation that is going on with the physical as well as the mental health, which leads into the drug use and everything else like that. And, I would, with all due respect to the state health department, I think it's better for that Fed money to just show up in these counties. Yep. And that's where it should be invested, because those people understand the boots on the ground, those men and the women that are helping. And so, I'm proud to fight for every dollar I can get for this district, and that's what everyone should be doing.
So that leads into a great question that I have and a concern that we've had. Earmarks are back. Our congressionally designated funding, I think they're called now. They are. I never had the pleasure of working for Congress or the Senate when we had earmarks. I would have loved that, because there's so much opportunity to take this money and truly impact your district with it. Right now, the policy of the Republicans is basically, we're not going to do this. And there's some concerns, and I agree with it to a bit, over transparency or funding, what do they used to call it, pork spending or whatever. But if and when you get elected, will you partake in the earmark process for the district?
Yeah, I would say this. When I get elected, I don't care what the process is called, but getting money from Washington, D.C. into this district is, pretty much number one importance. I think it's really, really important to make sure that the money comes for health, comes from education. We can run our own health needs. We can run what should be taught and everything else at a local control, but we need funds to do that. We have some of the poorest counties in the district, in the state, some of the most rural in the entire country, and we need funds to do that, to make sure that people can do their ranching and do their farming and have their small businesses. And I think that's really, really important. We're not going to have huge amounts of manufacturing in a lot of these places. It'd be great to get some of it as well, but at the end of the day, it's a rural community. And it'd be great to see some money come into the Pueblos and the Grand Junctions of the world where there is some good manufacturing that needs to happen and production and true blue-collar jobs, whether they're unionized or not. I'm proud to be supported by the unions. I think that's really important. That was not my path to victory in the primary to earn a lot of those endorsements, but I'm happy to have those. I think it's important to have people to have really solid jobs and wages. One of the things I think that's missing, there's this national 3.5% unemployment rate, which is really low. But when I was up in Rio Blanco County at the Club 20, your friends up there at a policy meeting, I met a gentleman working in one of the hotels who is an engineer, and I think he was probably making $17 or $18 an hour. Well, he was doing the exact same engineering work in one of the fields and was paid $61 an hour. And at $61 an hour, that's $115,000, $120,000 a year. That's a real career. That's a real job. That's a real safety net for to be able to raise your kids and have a little fun and do some vacation stuff and have a couple of toys here and there. So I think it's not just that the unemployment rate is low; it's the quality of the paycheck.
So let me ask you, there's a lot of the congressionally directed spending and appropriations get lumped into the same thing. They're not the same thing, are they?
No. I mean, I think it's important that there are programs that every state and every district is going to get a hold of. But I would hope, again, one of the top one or two jobs there is for every representative to be advocating on behalf of the men and the women and the families and the businesses of their district. And when that money is being put around, it should come here. We have a classic case. Lauren Bobart's not the only one, but she voted against a tremendous amount of stuff, millions and millions of dollars for water infrastructure storage, millions of dollars for rural education, millions of dollars for veterans. She voted against him, and then she comes home and sends out postcards of all these things that she's proud of and would show up at the ribbon cutting, even though she voted against them. And I think some people notice that, some people don't. But I'm proudly going there to try to figure out how to advocate for this district and bring home the money that's needed. And I don't really care what it's called. I believe in the transparency of it. That's really, really important, number one. And everything I come back, I'll be very proud to say publicly what it's for. I appreciate there was this bridge to nowhere that people talked about, 20, 30 years ago in Alaska. But I think it's important to make sure that as much money comes back to this district as possible. I can't see anyone who drives around this district and says, we couldn't use a little bit more money in the hands of our well-thought-out local officers, public officials, civic leaders, business leaders, and they would know how to put the money to work better than the feds. But the money needs to come out of there.
Yeah, and for the record, it's completely transparent now. You can't hide it. You can't just go support your friends. Yeah. Hey, Sarah, you want to build a warehouse? Let me write this check from the government. So veterans, we have a high veteran population here in Pueblo and the district. Yeah. And a lot of this is the rural veteran that just kind of wants to get away, live on their own, do their thing. But some of our VA healthcare is the worst in these rural districts. And there was the Air Commission recommendations that came up to close all these rural clinics in the Action 22 area in Colorado. Luckily, that got put on hold. It's not going away. This is on the Senate side. They have to confirm their commission, and then they vote on the recommendations. They didn't confirm their commission, so it's basically on hold for a couple of years, and then we'll go through this cycle again. But the VA needs to be held accountable for our rural citizens, our rural veterans of Colorado. The director of this side of the mountain, Mr. Kilmer, he's doing a great job. He's doing everything he can to get out there to the rural parts, but it's tough for him. And a lot of this, again, federally, it comes down to funding. Thankfully, the PACT Act was passed. That's the burn pit legislation, which I think that some people here in Colorado voted against. That's huge, because being a veteran myself, like I slept next to one of those things for almost a year.
Yeah.
And every time I cough or my head hurts, I freak out, not knowing what's happening. But will you support the VA's mission to not only fund rural access to VA healthcare, but also kind of fix the VA? Because as one of the largest government organizations out there, they have a lot of problems, and they're too focused on Denver or the big cities and not focused on Pueblo or Lamar, Trinidad, these areas. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've had this discussion before, Brian, but thank you for, I know it gets a little pedantic a little bit, but I do say thank you for your service. It's tough out there. I think there is, at the bureaucratic level, the VA has been beat up a lot, but I think that has to do with these big cities and what's going on in DC. And I know there's a lot of well-meaning people, but these are, hundreds of thousands of people working there.
Yeah.
I think the boots on the ground people around rural Colorado, I don't think there's here under bureaucratic stuff. And I know that there's some legislation in place where if it takes too long to go through the VA process, they might be able to access some other types of medical supply to make sure that they can try to, if the wait's too long in the VA clinics. But shutting down clinics in the Cortez area, in Montezuma, and down even in Pueblo, I mean, luckily the Alamosas and the Pueblos and the Grand Junctions, they have some pretty solid healthcare centers. But when, there's hundreds of other communities that people are driving over an hour to, and then you put whether it's the Home of the Heroes here or everywhere else like this, we have a very high population percentage of veterans, not only down here but obviously the Fruita area and the Grand Junction area as well. And everyone needs to be looked after, especially those that have truly served their country with in the line of fire. And so I would love to see those clinics remain open and try to figure out how to do that. And that's some of my conversation about there's so many aspects of this healthcare system which is challenging. And my view is I want to focus on the rural aspects of that, civilian and military, whatever it is. And there's so many things going on in the world of education. I want to focus specifically on those that are characteristically for the rural aspects of education. Because you can get sucked into a 50-year conversation and nothing gets done. And every day that goes by, the citizens of CD3 are hurting. And so I really, and Republicans get sick as well. And it's building these coalitions with Republican representatives from Nebraska and Wyoming and Utah and New Mexico that are out here in the West as well as in Appalachia, and try to figure out it really is rural versus urban. And that's happened in the parties, which I can talk about a little bit. It's less about them and, DNR. It's really about the rural versus urban. And the Democratic Party has done a horrible job over the past 30 years in focusing on rural America.
Yeah, and that's kind of the story of our life with Action 22 right now.
Yeah, no, and thank you all for what you guys are doing.
We don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. We're rural. That's all we care about.
And that's a hard line to. We didn't pick the easy battle on that. Not the party, but just so collectively, Action 22, their median household income is $47,000 as of 2020, and they're of the 10 poorest counties in Colorado, 9 of them are in Action 22's footprint. And it is that piece where it's really hard to conceptualize when you're living, when you're working in other states or DC, what geographically the challenges are as an added layer to poor and rural and all of those things. In education, I love that you say that. It is more of a state issue than it is other side. But one of the things that's a really big, and it's a nationwide issue, is energy. And we end up having a conversation every single day in our office about energy and energy development and transmission and infrastructure and what energy and when and how and where. So I'm sure I'm not the first person to bring this up to you.
Yeah. No. And I appreciate that. And, that's the conversation I had with the Club 20 and the policy committee. There's a couple assumptions that I'm trying to get off there, and which is that I'm not a Denver Democrat. I'm not a Washington, D.C. Democrat. I've had this conversation a lot. I'm into numbers, and there's a certain amount of energy demand and there's a certain amount of energy supply. And just because you wish that every single thing could be done from solar power, or wind, which are all great, and I'm glad that we're invested in those things. The math says you can't do it, and so we need to figure out how to do all of the above, and that's the main thing. And so a couple of things I've said from day one: I'm never going to disparage anyone, any family, male or female, who's working in the traditional energy production industry. It's one of the biggest mistakes, not just the Democrats have made, but a lot of people in the big cities have made. And I'm pretty sure some of those Democratic legislatures' constituents probably use 5 times as much energy as the men and the women pulling out of the ground. And I think that, it's a lot of people believe you go to the grocery store and that's where the food's made, right? And the water's made in the tap, right? And the gas just comes out of the gas pump. And I think a lot of people just completely lack the ability to realize that. And I've said this not just during this campaign, my whole life, which is that if a barrel of oil is going to be produced, it's much better to be produced in the United States than it is, getting us oil from Saudi Arabia, which President Biden had to go to and pretty much, kind of check in with them, as at the same time he was shutting down some things that should not have been shut down. And we're getting oil from Iran and Venezuela. And it's not like we're getting solar power from Denmark, right? I mean, we're getting pretty much the same stuff. And the oil, the rules that we have here, the labor rules we have here, and the environmental rules we have here are a hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
Than what they are overseas, let alone the transportation thing. So we need to do that. Getting to the natural gas conversation production, which is pretty much CD3's sweet spot.
Yes. More
than coal, obviously, more than oil is this natural gas. And of all these old traditional forms of energy, natural gas is by far and away the best place that we should. That's where we kind of need to hold for that 5, 10, 15, 20 years until we figure out realistically where we can start making the numbers add up before we get into all the great stuff that can come from hydro and solar and carbon capture and geothermal and the rest of all that stuff. We need all of the above. We have to figure this how to do it. And that's something that's really, really important to figure out how to do.
Well, we appreciate that. And if you want to go back on,
what do you? Did I scare you?
No. I just put up the Sarah rant on natural gas, and
you haven't seen it yet. You haven't seen my rant. But what you just said, I'm about to fall out of my chair. That is so exactly what we've been talking about, and not to get into the party politic weeds on this at all, but. I've got to ask you, how did you arrive at this position that you just laid out?
Well, I mean, I like to follow things prior to getting involved in this political conversation. I spent 8 years on my local city council. That was elected community service, a lot of land use code and some other things like that. And again, I've been to 40 or 50 countries for work and did business in another 40 or 50. So I have a pretty good grasp of kind of how the world works, so to speak. But again, and I've been involved in a lot of great green energy transformation stuff and supporting that and stuff like that. But we have to look at the math and what's really important. And so, it's a little weird because I accepted to come to, I asked Bobart to debate 5. I wanted 5 debates against her, and I wanted to have a town hall, and I think that chances to have just the normal citizens ask questions, I think, is really important. And she accepted Club 20. And when I told them I was going to come to Club 20, they kept on asking me, you're the first Democrat that's gone. And I'm like, I didn't know that you had an option to blow off one of the most important organizations in the district. I didn't realize you have that. Even if I did, I wouldn't take it because I need to get in there and let people know. Yeah. And I need to get over this perception of that. But, everything I said now is exactly what I said during the primary. Because I believe it. The reason this was easy for me to get into the race, even though that it comes with a lot of other consequences, is that I'm a moderate, passionate about pragmatic problem solving, building consensus. And it might sound a little naive. That's truly who I am. And that's truly what I think this district is lacking, especially with our current representative. They want someone to kind of focus on their families and their kids and their grandkids and the businesses. And so I knew that whatever I said, every letter I wrote, every vowel I mentioned in the primary would have been held against me later on in the general. And so, I just believe in speaking the truth, and I believe in consistency. When the facts change, I change, and I've learned, and I get wisdom, and always seeking to learn. But this is what I told her the Democratic primary. I'm pro-energy. I'm a moderate. We need to figure out how to do this. I talked about if we're going to get gas if there's going to be gas produced, it needs to be produced in the United States. I know that we have some of the cleanest coal like physically that's coming out of Moffett and stuff like that. And so I appreciate those coal plants are being shut down, and they are here, which if we're going to be doing from coal to natural gas, that's a good transition in my mind. It needs to be done respectfully. But if if that coal production is just going to be moving to Wyoming or Utah or New Mexico, well, what good is that? We probably have better regulations here than our other neighboring states. And if there's money going to be produced and we're using it, I think we need to be realistic about that. So, the holy grail is obviously locally produced, carbon-free energy production, but it's going to take some time to get there. And so I don't think I've changed my tune since, I was a young person as soon as you start looking at it. I don't know. I appreciate the aspirational aspects of it. I think it's important for us to remain aspirational, but also at the end of the day, I think everyone in Congress has about 175 days a year to be there. And the vast majority of those 175 days, I want to be working on stuff to get things done. And I've told people for like 10 years, if there was a Get Stuff Done party, I'd be in the Get Stuff Done party. Yeah. But the Get Stuff Done party is not doing very well right now.
Well, and you said something that I don't think anybody that's running for office has said on our show, maybe one or two, but you're willing to work across the aisle for common sense solutions for the district. You'd be surprised that nobody says that right now.
Really?
Well, they're not brave enough. They're not. Well, brave enough.
Listen, I can't. There are fewer Democrats than Republicans, and so the district here is about 25% Democrat, 31 Republican, and 43% unaffiliated. And listen, I was unaffiliated to December 27th. I registered to be Democrat on December 27th. As I started to explore this option of running. I have a couple core Democratic values, mostly on kind of the libertarian aspects of I want the government out of my bedroom and who people marry and everything else like that. But at the end of the day, both parties were kind of driving me crazy. And the urban, one of the problems I think we have in our politics now is that the rural America is almost monopolized by the Republican Party, and the urban areas are pretty much monopolized by the Democratic Party. And when you have a monopoly, you don't get the best version of the competition. And so the best version of the Democratic Party is not showing up in our big cities. And the best version of the Republican Party is not showing up in rural America. And it's because they have an 80 or 90% kind of say in that conversation. And so I'm running to represent our district with a lot more pride and understanding the difference between right and wrong, which I don't think Representative Bobart does. But I also want to make a case that rural America needs to be fought over by as many parties as are out there.
Yeah, especially now that more people are moving to rural America.
Yeah.
The numbers are going up, and people are getting out of cities. I mean, we saw what happened in California and New York. They're leaving, and they're going to where nobody will bug them, and they can kind of live their life. I know we have to get you out of here pretty quick, so what's some last thoughts you'd like to share with us?
No, I just thank you guys for what you're doing. I think it's really, really important. And, again, I'm part of this bipartisan pro-normal coalition I'm building. I need about 10% of our prior voters. I thought back in October, November, that if someone does run against her, they could probably get about 30 or 40% of the vote. I had lunch with Don Coram halfway through the primary. I said, Don, it's a noble effort to run against your own party, especially what's going on now. I have a huge amount of respect for Liz Cheney as well. And I said, I just don't think that you're going to be able to get 51% of the Republican vote. I think you can get 30 to 40%. He got 36%. Mm-hmm. And when I said, listen, if you win, it won't be good for me, but it'll be great for the country. If you get 5% of the vote in the primary, it's not good for the country and it's horrible for me. But if you can get that 30 to 40% of kind of the rational Republican, those that want people to focus on their district, I think I can build a coalition with some amount of those people to get enough people to send this district in a much better position and have someone that understands the difference between right and wrong. And again, who do you want negotiating in those committee meetings and in those subcommittee meetings on behalf of your family, your grandkids, your kids, your business, and your community? And I think I'm the best person for that job in this thing. And I'm just trying to get that message out that there are some labels that both parties have that are unfair, and there's some labels that both parties have that are fair. And I'm just trying to let people know I'm not a Denver Democrat and I'm not a Washington, D.C. Democrat. And the only way I'm going to hold the seat when I win is by making sure everyone's looked after.
And if somebody wants to find out more about you, where do they go? AdamforColorado.com. And we get back to everyone within 24 hours. So 970-710-3090. 970-710-3090 is a cell phone for me. And Adam at AdamforColorado.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was really excited to hear that all of that. Disclaimers.
Disclaimer. Here's my favorite thing to say at the end of these. Action 22 does not support or endorse a candidate during an election season, but what we do is offer a platform for any Action 22 running for office to come on and talk about their campaign and why they're running. So we appreciate any and all candidates. I can't talk right now. Any and all candidates, please email me at show@action22.org. Again, show@action22.org. And come on the show and tell us why you're running, what you care about and the issues and why people should vote for you. And we'll be here for you.
We have lots of interesting things coming up. By the time you hear this, the state fair stuff will have passed, but I hope that all of you who are listening at some point during the next 2 weeks will take advantage of all the really great things with the Colorado State Fair. We're going to be doing a meeting of the mayors after Labor Day that we're going to talk about several issues that are particular for mayors that are part of the Action 22 footprint. I'm going to be, I don't know if I've announced this yet, but I'm going to be moderating the Gubernatorial Debates that are happening in Pueblo on the 28th of September. Those are hosted and promoted by the Greater Pueblo Chamber and the Chieftain. They've worked really hard to make sure that happens for everybody. But prior to that, on the 6th and 7th, or the 7th and 8th, are the debates in Pueblo. So we hope that you guys can tune in for some of that. And then, of course, our Action 22 annual meeting will be the 21st and the 22nd of October. If you are not yet a member of Action 22, what's the holdup? You're involved. You're with part of your community.
Please join.
We need you. We need your voice. We need to make, as Adam just laid out, the voice of rural Colorado stronger, and we need you to do that. So go to our website or email us at show@action22.org. We'll put Micah in touch with you, and he'll get you signed up. So Chad Forthman, I hope that I know you're listening, and I know that the next time I see you, you're going to have a mustache. I get it. But really, I saw Garen with one on Facebook post. I don't even know what to say to you about this anymore. Just knock it off. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.